In exactly 28 minutes, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche managed to do what Washington had failed to accomplish for over 6 years. He forced Senator Adam Schiff to sit in absolute silence while a meticulously documented career of political fabrication was read back to him, piece by piece, right on live television. Blanche dismantled the senator document by document, falsehood by falsehood, inside the very same building where Schiff had previously recited a fabricated presidential transcript and later brushed it off as mere parody. The surgical irony of this moment was palpable, as for years Schiff had positioned himself as the ultimate prosecutor, launching endless inquisitions against a sitting president from the safety of the congressional dais. Now, the dynamic had completely inverted. Schiff was still the one holding the microphone, but the man answering his inquiries was the very defense attorney who had meticulously reviewed every single piece of evidence that the senator ever claimed to possess. Blanche had read the actual file. He did not rely on the sensationalized version that Schiff peddled on cable news networks, nor did he read a summary, an executive brief, or a parody. He had consumed the primary documents in their entirety, and he was prepared to echo those exact texts back to the senator on a live national broadcast. The Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing for the Attorney General position was called to order at 1:00 a.m. within the walls of the Hart Senate office building. Every available seat was occupied, with television cameras from every major news network trained directly on the center table. The upper gallery was overflowing with journalists, political aides, and that distinct breed of Washington insider who can sense an impending political fight days before it actually unfolds. At the witness table sat Todd Blanche, dressed sharply in a dark suit without a tie, placing a solitary folder to his left side and a glass of water to his right, a glass he would leave completely untouched for the subsequent 3 hours of highly charged testimony. At 52 years of age, Blanche brought a formidable resume to the room, standing as a former federal prosecutor out of the Southern District of New York, an accomplished defense attorney who had shielded some of the most prominent defendants in modern American legal history, and the official who had served 14 months as Deputy Attorney General before stepping into the acting role following the dismissal of Pam Bondi. His nomination for the permanent cabinet position had been announced 6 weeks prior, and this specific hearing was the crucial crucible that would dictate his ultimate confirmation. Looming over him from the dais was Senator Adam Schiff. Although Schiff had occupied his Senate seat for less than 2 years, his national footprint was undeniable, having served as the lead manager in 2 separate presidential impeachment trials, commanded the House Intelligence Committee throughout the sprawling Russia inquiry, and positioned himself as the public face of every major investigation into Donald Trump that had consumed American political discourse since 2017. His tenure was notably marked by a formal censure from the House of Representatives, an unprecedented rebuke that he promptly monetized, raising over $8 million directly off the back of his own congressional condemnation. By any objective standard, Schiff stood as the most visible congressional investigator in modern history. And as Blanche was preparing to systematically prove the most thoroughly documented fabricator to ever wield a government gavel. The initial 90 minutes of the hearing followed a highly predictable script, with various lawmakers posing standard questions regarding Department of Justice priorities, questioning the nominee on the fentanyl epidemic, border enforcement strategies, and federal antitrust policies. Blanche navigated these inquiries with the calm, measured precision of an executive who had spent the past year managing the sprawling bureaucracy and understood its internal mechanics flawlessly. Republican members offered predictable softballs, while Democratic figures applied pressure regarding institutional independence from the executive branch, amounting to standard procedural theater that usually ends up in the public archives, watched by almost no one. But then the committee chairman officially recognized Senator Schiff. Schiff leaned in, adjusted his microphone, squared his shoulders, and glared down at the witness table with the practiced, theatrical authority of a politician who had spent years dominating this exact type of exchange, deeply accustomed to being the one demanding answers rather than providing them. When Schiff finally spoke, the very atmosphere in the room seemed to definitively shift in temperature. He addressed the nominee directly, pointing out that Blanche had served as the personal criminal defense attorney for Donald Trump, painting a vivid picture of Blanche sitting at the defense table in a Manhattan courtroom, conferring with his client during jury selection, and aggressively cross-examining state witnesses. Schiff allowed each statement to hang in the heavy air, utilizing the familiar cadence of a prosecutor stacking evidence block by block, challenging the core of the nomination by questioning how the American public could possibly trust Blanche to operate the Justice Department with genuine independence. He demanded to know how the nominee could ever separate his loyalty to a former client who now occupied the Oval Office from his constitutional duty to the nation. Leaning further over the elevated dais, Schiff escalated the attack, highlighting that 16,000 department employees had departed under Blanche's tenure, accusing the acting Attorney General of targeting former Biden administration officials, indicting James Comey over a social media publication, and intentionally purging career prosecutors from complex cases they had spent years developing. Schiff's delivery was utterly flawless, carrying the unmistakable polish of a man who had rehearsed these exact lines for this exact audience, representing pure political performance art in which the senator deeply excelled. He concluded his opening barrage by declaring that Blanche was acting not as an attorney general, but as a defense lawyer who never actually stopped shielding his primary client, proclaiming that no man could serve the rule of law while serving a single master, and accusing Blanche of having clearly chosen the latter. Satisfied with his monologue, Schiff leaned back into his leather chair while allied lawmakers nodded in silent agreement. Behind him, a young aide frantically typed on a smartphone, already packaging the soundbite for rapid social media distribution, while up in the press gallery, narratives were already being finalized, framing the exchange as a decisive victory where the senator dismantled the nominee's credibility in under 5 minutes. However, the man sitting at the witness table offered absolutely no visible reaction. Blanche had endured grueling cross-examinations from both sides of the legal aisle, recognizing the precise anatomy of a partisan ambush and the exact posture of an attacker who falsely believed they had secured a total victory. Blanche quietly made a single notation on his legal pad and drew a deliberate line beneath it. When the senator finally ceased speaking, a heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room for 4 long seconds. Then the acting attorney general raised his head, locking eyes with his interrogator and holding that gaze with the unyielding, unblinking intensity of a federal prosecutor who had spent 8 years in New York hunting down individuals who made a lucrative living out of deceiving the public. Blanche began his response with a terrifying calm, acknowledging the grave accusations regarding his professional independence and overall fitness for the position, promising to address every single claim in a tone that was remarkably quiet. It was not a weak softness, but rather the commanding, dangerous quiet that falls over a federal courtroom the very moment a seasoned litigator steps up for a final closing argument. He stated that since the senator had explicitly weaponized the concept of fitness for office and questioned the credibility of the person sitting at the table, it was only appropriate that they examine credibility in rigorous detail. With deliberate precision, Blanche opened his solitary folder and announced that they would be discussing the senator's own track record. He noted his 20 years of legal practice, spanning 8 years as a federal prosecutor and over 10 years as a defense attorney, bluntly stating that he had never encountered an individual who had manufactured more evidence across more proceedings on more occasions with fewer consequences than the man sitting on the dais. Up on the platform, Schiff's pen abruptly halted. Blanche pressed forward, reminding the room that the senator had spent 3 consecutive years broadcasting to the nation that he possessed concrete proof of foreign election, collusion, listing the networks, and pointing out the 200 televised appearances where the senator claimed to hold evidence that was beyond circumstantial and very much worthy of high-level investigation. Reciting the exact quote from the 22nd of March 2017 television interview on MSNBC with Chuck Todd, Blanche delivered the words entirely from memory, never once breaking eye contact to check his open folder. He explained his intimate knowledge of the actual files, clarifying that his understanding did not stem merely from studying the 448 pages of the Mueller report, nor from reviewing the Durham report, but rather from his foundational role as the primary defense attorney in the trenches, leaning forward in a subtle physical shift that instantly altered the geometry of the room. He detailed his unwavering legal obligation to process every shred of evidence the government claimed to hold. He had thoroughly analyzed every unsealed classified briefing, every single witness statement, every federal law enforcement Form 302, and every comprehensive intelligence assessment. Staring directly at Schiff, Blanche delivered the devastating truth. The files were entirely empty, yielding absolutely no evidence of collusion, neither direct nor circumstantial. He knew this because he had scrutinized every page, and more importantly, he stated that the senator also knew the files were empty because the committee's own internal witnesses had explicitly confirmed it behind closed doors. Up on the platform, a subtle but undeniable change occurred in Schiff's posture. Despite his extensive legal training and hyper-awareness of the cameras, the defensive forward lean was highly visible, marking the exact second he realized the interrogation had flipped and he was now the vulnerable defendant. Attempting to pivot, the senator quickly interjected that official reports clearly stated that foreign actors interfered in the 2016 election. Blanche did not raise his voice, but his response sliced cleanly through the defense, clarifying that foreign interference and active political collusion were 2 entirely distinct legal concepts, accusing the senator of deliberately conflating those claims for 6 years to continuously mislead the American public. He pointed out that the senator was attempting the exact same rhetorical trick right there in the hearing room, perfectly mirroring his behavior from 200 separate cable news segments. Emphasizing that specificity is the absolute bedrock of the justice system, Blanche picked up a document from his folder and zeroed in on that specific March 2017 television interview, demanding a direct, uncompromising answer on whether the senator had explicitly claimed to possess more than circumstantial evidence. Schiff attempted a careful, highly nuanced deflection, arguing he had merely suggested the matter required further investigation. Blanche immediately shut down the evasion, clarifying that he was asking about 3 specific words in a highly specific sequence, demanding a simple yes or no. After a tense pause, the senator tried to contextualize his phrase, prompting Blanche to smoothly interrupt, loudly log the affirmative answer, and pivot seamlessly to his next question. The unmistakable rhythm of the exchange was instantly recognized by anyone familiar with the justice system, serving as a textbook, methodical cross-examination that effectively pinned the prominent lawmaker directly to the witness stand. Blanche established the timeline, forcing the senator to admit that prior to his media tour, the Congressional Intelligence Committee had already interviewed James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence. After Schiff consulted with his chief counsel and attempted another vague deflection, Blanche cornered him into confirming the specific timeline of the testimony. Reading methodically from the official transcript, Blanche quoted the former director stating under oath that he had never seen any direct empirical evidence of illicit plotting or conspiring with foreign actors to meddle in the election. He set the document down and demanded to know if those specific words were spoken directly to the committee. When the senator desperately tried to appeal to broader context, Blanche forcefully shut him down, reminding the room that he was quoting directly from a committee transcript that the chairman had intentionally refused to release for 3 years. Faced with the undeniable text and a heavy stretch of silence, the senator quietly conceded that the transcript reflected that exact language. The surgical execution continued as Blanche produced the next document, highlighting identical testimony from Samantha Power, the former ambassador to the United Nations. Posing the exact same question, he yielded the exact same result, quoting her testimony, confirming she was not in possession of any real evidence. Blanche then targeted the testimony of Susan Rice, the former National Security Advisor, noting that her appearance before the same committee resulted in the exact same admission of zero direct evidence. When Schiff hesitated during a longer pause and feigned the need to review the specific language, Blanche coldly offered to read the committee's own hidden transcript aloud, noting it was generated directly under the senator's own overarching authority. The senator's outright refusal to ask for the reading served as an implicit admission of overwhelming guilt. Placing the papers down, the nominee stared at the lawmaker across a physical space completely devoid of notes or paper, leaving absolutely nothing between them except a heavy wooden table and 6 years of documented lies. Blanche summarized the staggering reality, pointing out that the senator's own witnesses, administration officials, and political allies had testified to a complete lack of proof under oath. Yet the lawmaker had repeatedly exited those secure, classified briefings, stood in front of television cameras, and assured the nation that he possessed the evidence, doing so not once or twice, but hundreds of times over 3 years, while the actual transcript sat buried in a classified vault. Blanche injected his deep professional expertise, noting that if an attorney in his profession took sworn testimony that established one reality and then told a jury the exact opposite, they would not just lose their law license, they would face severe criminal prosecution. Citing Rule 3.4 of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct, he accused the lawmaker of violating fundamental ethical statutes, not in a regulated courtroom where consequences are immediate, but on unaccountable television broadcasts where they were not. A camera operator caught the senator nervously reaching for his water glass, signaling his first undeniable physical concession of the morning. Pivoting seamlessly, Blanche introduced the subject of the infamous parody defense, maintaining a relentless, steady vocal rhythm that weaponized strict consistency. By keeping every word at the exact same temperature and speed, he completely denied his opponent any emotional register to mirror or actively resist. He brought the committee back to the 26th of September 2019 impeachment hearing regarding a crucial foreign phone call, the most serious constitutional proceeding the legislative body can ever undertake. Lifting 2 separate pieces of paper into the air with his arms fully extended, Blanche ensured every lens in the room captured both documents simultaneously. In his left hand, he held the official publicly released transcript of the call. In his right hand, he held the congressional record containing the opening statement the chairman had delivered right on the dais. As the gallery leaned forward and camera operators adjusted their angles, Blanche read from the right-hand page, reciting the mob-style dialogue that the senator had attributed to the chief executive, demanding made-up dirt on a political opponent. Lowering the page, he explicitly stated that not a single one of those words appeared in the actual official transcript firmly held in his left hand. He condemned the act of fabricating dialogue between the President of the United States and a foreign head of state during an impeachment hearing while appearing to read from an official document on live national television. Sitting both pages down side by side, Blanche recalled the immediate backlash from colleagues who exposed the theatrical stunt in real time and completely refused to improvise for parody purposes. Folding his hands, Blanche focused intensely on the senator's defense that the fabricated reading was meant, at least in part, as a simple parody. Letting the sheer absurdity of the word parody linger in the heavy air of an impeachment hearing, Blanche drew on his 8 years prosecuting violent crimes, racketeering, and high-level fraud in the Southern District of New York. He stated bluntly that if any government prosecutor submitted a fictionalized transcript into a legal proceeding as evidence for any reason, they would not merely face a reprimand or censure. They would be completely disbarred, prosecuted, and locked in a cell. Yet the politician sitting across from him had injected fabricated evidence into the highest constitutional mechanism available to the House, later brushing it off as mere comedy. Relentless in his pacing and temperature, the nominee moved to the next document, highlighting the 17th of September 2019 television appearance on MSNBC occurring 9 days prior to the transcript incident. Confronted by a journalist regarding contact with a crucial whistleblower, the senator had explicitly denied speaking directly with the individual. Blanche then produced 3 separate printouts revealing that major fact-checkers rated the statement false, called it a false claim, and concluded he wrongly implied no contact had occurred. Setting the rulings down in a row, Blanche emphasized that these were 3 independent, nonpartisan journalism foundations, all reaching the exact same conclusion: the senator had flagrantly lied. Because his staff had already coordinated with the representative before the complaint was publicly filed, he knew the substance of the issue. Yet he went on national television and told America he had 0 contact. When the deception fully unraveled, the lawmaker attempted a weak defense based on redefining the word spoken to exclude the coordination that had actually taken place. Tapping his pen once on the table, Blanche reminded the lawmaker that he understood exactly what the word spoken meant and what the journalist was asking, yet he answered with a definitively false statement. Gathering the printouts into a single stack, the nominee outlined the devastating pattern of 3 documented fabrications within 2 years, claiming evidence of collusion that internal witnesses denied, fabricating a presidential phone call and calling it parody, and denying whistleblower contact that his staff had already executed. All of these actions were permanently etched into the public record and thoroughly debunked by official transcripts or independent watchdogs. In the realm of criminal justice, Blanche observed, such repeated behavior is officially classified as a pattern, prompting investigators not to ask if a person is having a bad day, but to relentlessly search for what else they have done. Turning to the last section of his meticulous folder, he addressed the 21st of June 2023 House vote to censure the lawmaker by a margin of 213 to 209. The resolution explicitly stated that he had misled the American public with falsehoods, misrepresentations, and severe abuses of sensitive information, forcing him to stand in the well of the House as one of only 3 members censured this century. But instead of reflecting on the historic disgrace, the lawmaker completely weaponized it that very evening. Blanche held up a printed screenshot of a text message sent to a donor list, begging for urgent donations to fight back against a supposed political attack. Over the subsequent quarter, that specific grievance campaign generated $8.1 million in political contributions, described by one strategist as the biggest in-kind contribution imaginable, prompting the senator to proudly call the censure a genuine badge of honor. Setting the screenshot down, Blanche analyzed the sequence through the sharp lens of a prosecutor accustomed to dissecting racketeering operations, describing the lawmaker's strategy as the most elegant business model he had ever seen. The cycle was simple: make a false claim on television, get caught by fact-checkers, label the consequence a political attack, send a fundraising text, collect massive funds, and simply repeat. This was not an act of public service. It was a highly lucrative subscription model funded by Americans who donated $25 because they believed the promise of evidence entirely unaware for 6 years that the product they were continuously purchasing was completely empty. Closing his folder and sliding it to his left, the acting Attorney General placed both hands flat on the wooden table, leaving nothing in front of him, no documents, no notes, no props. He transitioned seamlessly into the role of a seasoned trial lawyer, delivering a final, inescapable closing argument. He noted that while his interrogator had utilized 12 minutes to attack his character, independence, and integrity, he had spent 20 minutes responding not with partisan opinions, but exclusively with the lawmaker's own direct words, internal committee transcripts, independent rulings, and the established public record. The resulting historical record shifted the burden, raising a far more pressing question, not about whether the nominee was fit to serve, but whether the senator was. Standing up with measured, purposeful intent, not dramatically, but exactly the way a litigator addresses a jury for the final time. Blanche summarized the sprawling indictment. He reiterated the years of deceit regarding Russian collusion, pointing out that the highest intelligence officials had testified to a lack of evidence under oath, yet the senator had told America the exact opposite for 3 years. He reminded the room of the fabricated presidential phone call passed off as parody during a constitutional crisis, the false national television statements debunked by 3 major watchdogs, and the historic congressional censure that was instantly converted into a massive fundraising windfall. The hearing room plunged into an absolute suffocating stillness. Reflecting on his legal duty to examine the evidence from his seat at the defense table, Blanche dropped his vocal register to that distinct, chilling frequency a prosecutor uses when delivering the single sentence a jury will remember forever. It wasn't there. He knew this because he looked, not because a pundit or headline told him, but because he sat in a courtroom with a binding obligation to find the truth, and the inescapable truth was that the senator had made it all up. Straightening his jacket, Blanche delivered a profound insight forged over 20 years of legal practice. Individuals who fabricate evidence never do it just once or twice. They do it until someone forcibly stops them. For 6 years, through 2 impeachments, 3 fact-checker rulings, 1 formal censure, and 57 contradictory transcripts, nobody had stopped the manipulation. Looking at Schiff, then scanning the gallery, then locking eyes with Schiff once more, Blanche noted that finally today somebody had asked about the actual evidence. Following a long, agonizing pause, he stated that the senator still could not produce it. Allowing 5 seconds of heavy silence to bleed through the chamber while the cameras remained completely motionless, the nominee uttered the definitive phrase that permanently ended the encounter. The counselor rests, Mr. Chairman, returning to his seat. Blanche meticulously aligned his folder with the edge of the table and folded his hands, refusing to offer his target another glance, while the hearing room collectively held its breath. Up on the dais, the carefully constructed composure of a media-trained veteran who had weathered endless critics and impeachment battles held for exactly 4 seconds before it visibly shifted, much like a structural wall succumbing to foundation failure. Attempting to salvage his dignity, the battered senator weakly requested a redirect, his voice noticeably thinner and far less controlled than it had been 12 minutes earlier. When the committee chairman offered the floor back to the witness, Blanche simply shook his head once, stating he had nothing further to add and that he believed the record spoke for itself. As a recess was called, the senator hastily rose from the dais and retreated into the corridors, marching with the tense, precise speed of a man desperate to leave while hyper-aware that cameras were calculating his every step. Swarmed by reporters seeking a triumphant soundbite, Blanche maintained the stoic discipline of a veteran litigator who understands exactly when a case is definitively closed. Leaving his water glass untouched with condensation still beading on the sides, he simply noted that he had asked questions based on official transcripts and independent rulings, And since the senator chose not to answer them, the American people were completely free to draw their own conclusions. He walked out without any additional remarks or a self-indulgent victory lap. The digital shockwaves were instantaneous, but the clip that went viral first was not the dramatic closing argument, it was the clinical cross-examination regarding the Clapper transcript. Watching Schiff attempt to contextualize while Blanche repeatedly cut through demanding a simple yes or no presented a brutal rhythm of question, deflection, redirect, and pin that played out online like a tense scene ripped directly from a legal thriller, except the blood on the floor was entirely real and happening to a sitting United States senator on live television. The devastating exchange accumulated 75 million views within 48 hours, while the counsel arrest became the mandatory sign-off for commentary segments for an entire week. Side-by-side comparisons of the fabricated 2019 transcript next to the actual text were shared 40 million times, introducing millions of citizens who had never watched a confirmation hearing to the name Todd Blanche. A frantic evening press release from the senator's office attempted to dismiss the exchange as a partisan display by a lawyer who spent his career defending a corrupt president, yet glaringly failed to address the specific testimonies, the Ukraine fabrication, the fact-check rulings, or the $8.1 million fundraising scheme. During a subsequent cable news interview, a prominent anchor directly pressed the lawmaker on the independent fact-checkers, confirming his false statements, only to watch Schiff helplessly pivot to congressional procedure over and over again. The clip went viral on its own merit, showcasing a politician who had spent 6 years interrogating others, completely unable to answer a single direct question. The Wall Street Journal editorial board seized on the moment, vindicating their past skepticism by noting that the man who finally read the actual file had said the truth right to the senator's face. The New York Times published a cautious analysis acknowledging that the nominee's devastating presentation relied entirely on nonpartisan official transcripts, public rulings, and the senator's own recorded statements. Legal commentators vigorously debated whether the fabricated transcript reading constituted sanctionable conduct under Senate rules, a debate that served as its own form of damning verdict for a man completely accustomed to sitting on the right side of the dais. Overnight, the confirmation prospects for Blanche shifted dramatically, reframing the narrative from a debate over a former personal lawyer to a celebration of a career prosecutor who successfully neutralized a career fabricator using nothing but the public record. 2 wavering senators announced their necessary support within 48 hours, while moderate colleagues conspicuously declined to comment on whether they would defend Schiff's highly troubled testimony record. The fallout rapidly transcended the hearing room, mutating into a sprawling institutional reckoning that examined whether the chairman had knowingly misrepresented classified intelligence to the public. Subpoenas targeted committee records spanning from 2017 through 2019, leading to immune depositions from 2 former staffers whose testimony, according to background sources, confirmed that their boss had been explicitly briefed on the lack of collusion evidence prior to making his massive public claims. Operating under his own authority, the Justice Department opened a parallel, devastating review focused on whether selective leaking of favorable classified intelligence while suppressing exculpatory evidence constituted criminal obstruction. A grand jury was swiftly convened in Washington, completing a poetic irony, where the architect of multiple presidential impeachments was now trapped in the direct crosshairs of a grand jury investigation led by the exact man he had attempted to disqualify. Simultaneously, the state bar initiated a severe inquiry with precise legal questions regarding whether the fabricated transcript reading violated Rule 8.4 of professional conduct and whether the false whistleblower statements constituted conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. While bar proceedings move slowly, the mere existence of the inquiry and the distinct possibility of losing his legal license permanently altered the political atmosphere surrounding the embattled lawmaker. Senate leadership managed the crisis the way institutions handle toxic liabilities, delivering cold, generic defenses of the Ethics Committee process at press conferences, conspicuously refusing to utter Schiff's name, defend his record, or mention the vanished evidence. The politician's digital footprint, normally a prolific and combative stream of omnipresent rhetoric, plunged into total darkness. For 9 days, the man who had never been silent was suddenly forced into complete silence. 4 months later, the structural collapse was finalized when the Ethics Committee issued a devastating finding, ruling that his conduct had actively undermined public confidence in the integrity of congressional proceedings. A formal reprimand was issued, serving as the Senate equivalent of the House censure he had already endured, officially crowning Adam Schiff as the only member of Congress in modern history to suffer formal condemnation from both legislative chambers. The ultimate investigator had been investigated himself, and the verdict both times remained exactly the same. 6 months post-hearing, his legal counsel orchestrated a desperate settlement with state authorities, accepting voluntary inactive status and surrendering his active legal license to avoid the humiliation of a public disbarment trial. Headlines across every major outlet practically wrote themselves, broadcasting that the man who ran 2 impeachment hearings was no longer legally licensed to practice law. The sprawling federal probe ultimately culminated in a crippling 4-count indictment, charging him with 2 counts of making false statements regarding Russia collusion while possessing contrary classified intelligence, 1 count of obstruction for blocking the release of contradictory committee transcripts, and 1 count of misusing classified information by selectively declassifying favorable material. Following a grueling 4-week trial built upon 57 committee transcripts, 300 televised appearances, 3 independent rulings, and the damning testimony of former staffers who watched him lie to the press, a jury of 12 everyday Americans handed down the final crushing judgment. He was found guilty on 3 of the 4 counts, resulting in a severe sentence of 3 years in a federal penitentiary, a staggering $2 million financial penalty, and a lifetime ban from holding federal office. The prosecutor had been prosecuted, and the impeacher had been impeached by the only tribunal that truly mattered, a jury of citizens who read the transcripts, watched the clips, and concluded what the evidence actually showed. Todd Blanche was officially confirmed as Attorney General 6 weeks after the explosive hearing by a vote of 54 to 46, completely rewriting the narrative of his nomination into the story of a man who asked the questions nobody else possessed the courage to ask. When questioned months later about orchestrating his defining moment, the new Attorney General rejected the premise, explaining that he did not intend to create a spectacle. He merely responded to an attack on his credibility by utilizing the objective historical record. Refusing to claim personal vindication, he stated he simply felt like a competent lawyer, executing his core function, reading the documents, demanding hard answers, and presenting facts. He observed that the sheer shock generated by someone holding a powerful senator accountable revealed far more about the broken nature of Washington than it did about him. Far away from the Beltway Theater in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a retired steelworker named Frank Kowalski sat frozen in front of his television, absorbing the absolute magnitude of the sentencing. For 3 long years, he had blindly believed the politician, consuming every hearing, press conference, and cable news segment with absolute certainty. He had fractured his own family over these lies, enduring bitter arguments with his son Danny at every family dinner from 2017 to 2020, relentlessly accusing his own child of being brainwashed while assuring his wife that the evidence was imminent. The evidence, of course, never materialized. Frank watched the new Attorney General expose the hidden Clapper transcript during the confirmation hearing, realizing that the administration's own intelligence officials had admitted under oath that there was nothing, all while he was being told there was everything. The elderly man didn't shout or curse. He sat perfectly still in the exact same chair where he had once cheered the televised impeachments, bearing the heavy burden of his deeply misplaced faith. Speaking to an empty room, he lamented spending 3 years calling his boy a fool. Picking up his phone, he stared at the screen for a long time before finally dialing his son to offer a quiet, heartbreaking apology, admitting his grave mistake and acknowledging that his son had been right all along. After a moment of silence, his son gently absolved him, pointing out that Frank had simply believed what he was told by authority figures and that the deception was not his fault. Hanging up the phone and turning off the television, Frank sat in the quiet of his living room, a room where he had spent 3 years being fiercely certain about something that had never been fundamentally true, and whispered to no one that it was indeed his fault for never demanding to see the actual evidence. He paused, finding a small shred of comfort in the realization that, eventually, somebody powerful finally did. The inevitable collision between a political career constructed entirely on optical illusions and a veteran prosecutor trained to separate raw truth from calculated fiction resulted in the absolute truth winning outright. Somewhere in Washington, the new Attorney General is sitting at a historic desk, occupying the exact same desk where Attorneys General have sat for 200 years, executing the precise mission he has pursued his entire professional life, meticulously reading the files, unearthing the suppressed truth, and building ironclad cases that can withstand the blinding light of a courtroom. God bless every single American citizen who placed their trust in powerful voices and deserved vastly better than the manipulation they received. God bless every divided household that fractured at the dinner table over empty claims, every father who mistakenly called his son a fool, and every family member who patiently waited for the absolute truth to finally surface. One man arrived at that hearing scheduled to be interrogated, but he walked out as the ultimate interrogator simply because he was the only individual in the room who had actually done the reading. The counselor rests, and the historical record will forever speak for itself.